Hi. Welcome back to the Multiverse Cartographer. This is, I believe, part 17 or episode 17 or something. So you might notice a few things are different. For example, this is vertical. So if you're on your phone, it's perfect for you. If you're on anything else, it's obnoxious. That's why I didn't go vertical for years and years and years and years. But I recently started going vertical on chicken philosophy, which is, well, check it out if you want to. Today, in following up, I broke with the formula last time. The formula wasn't so good. I don't like it. I didn't like it. But I did it anyway, which was to write up an entire script and then read it to you. But I'm like looking at the screen and then occasionally looking back at you. I don't have one of those teleprompters. And so it works better with a teleprompter. That's why people have teleprompters, where they're looking at the words and you don't see the words, but they see the words, and they're reading the words off the teleprompter while they're looking through it at the camera. Maybe one day I'll get one of those. Until then, I should not do scripted content. That's my opinion on the subject. But last time we broke with the formula because I did a recital without a commentary. And I think it's been a few months since then. So the Multiverse Cartographer project kind of fell off at that point. But I thought I'd come in and do a commentary. But one thing real quick announcement. One thing I was doing all that time is writing out those scripts and then trimming them down so that I could put them in an appendix section of this book, The New World Empire and the Interdimensional Coffee House. I've decided not to do that. For one thing, it'd make it like 1.5 times this size. And it's just me saying, okay, this means this means this. If you want to know what it all means, you can watch this series. Otherwise, if you want to read it, I mentioned earlier, don't buy this book until I say buy this book. So this is the official announcement that this book is finished. The version on Amazon right now is the final version. So buy this book. It's The New World Empire and the Interdimensional Coffee House by Edward Reeve, and I'll put a link in the description. This includes the Small Gray Mouse, Smaller Mouse, the Multiverse Cartographer, and a bonus 4th section in which you can read my sort of original short story-ish that I wrote when I was 12, I think, called Ruler of the World. And just for fun, here's a clip of me reading a little bit of that.
I stood there with what wasn't left of me, thinking about everything that had ever happened to me in my life. The strange thing was, everything I thought of, immediately afterward, I forgot it. I would try to remember what I had just thought, and I couldn't. I thought about my entire life and forgot it at the same time.
Yeah, that was right around, well, that was like 9 months after I wrote it or so. 9 or 10 months after I wrote it. That's how old I was, and that's what my voice sounded like. Anyway, okay, enough about that. So contained within this, as I stated, is this, the Small Gray Mouse. There's a lot of illustrations in this. It might seem like, why is this $30? It's because it's full of high-resolution color images, and I couldn't make it any cheaper than that. Here's just one example. Okay, so Larry the Librarian, what's it about? It's about me, of course, especially anything where the protagonist is named Charles is about me, pretty much directly, though usually abstractly, metaphorically. At the time that I wrote it, I was in the process of destroying my old life in order to dive headlong into the unknown. In other words, it was 2017 before I left California. And those who know me outside of this Multiverse Cartographer series know that in late 2017 I left California, and long story short, I ended up relocating to India, where I've been ever since. That's where I am now. I'm speaking to you from India. Isn't that wild? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Depends on your definition of wild, I suppose. But so at the time, I wasn't, feeling too hot. I had this thing, and maybe I mentioned it on here before. When I was a little kid, I was a little bit aware of the story of Lord Buddha when he was a young prince, 29-year-old prince, and how he left it all behind. He left his palace walls and went and sat under a tree and lived as a beggar, basically. And I determined that if I ever wanted to end my life, if whatever was going on, and then this is like when I'm like 5 years old, by the way, I'm having these thoughts. Not to say, oh yeah, I was a young genius. I mean, I was, but I'm not like meaning to emphasize that. The point is that I concluded that if it ever got that bad, I would just climb out the window and walk. And because it's better to be a wandering beggar, homeless person, than to, it was 1984 or something, so we didn't say homeless person yet. We would say beggar. It was after hobo, before homeless person, so it was beggar. Yeah, better to be that than no longer be alive, right? So that was one thing that I took away from my early learnings about the life of Lord Buddha. And you might notice I call him Lord Buddha. That's part of living in India. That's a term of respect that's given here that's usually not given in a lot of Western countries. So it might sound odd to your ear. So yeah, in 2017, those were some emotions I was having. Those were some feelings I was having. I wasn't quite happy with my life as it was. And I concluded that I would buy a one-way ticket to Nepal. And then kind of as a last-minute thing, before I bought the ticket to Nepal, I was talking to my friend in South Africa, and I told him, I was getting divorced, and he said, so am I. And I'm like, holy cow, really? What happened to you? And we were exchanging stories. And then I was like, you know what? Before I go to Nepal, I'm going to come see you. So I bought a ticket to South Africa and spent 10 days with Kay and his friends, the gang. Here's a picture. And that was fun. Then I went to Nepal. And anyway, but Larry the Librarian was a moment in time. The whole going down into the earth and all of that had a lot to do with the way that I would lead my Shavasana in my yoga classes that I was teaching at that time. I would have people lay down and connect with the cement building they were in, and through the cement and concrete and steel beams, connect with the earth. It was a crunch fitness usually. And then to connect through the bedrock and the mantle all the way down to the core of the earth, the white hot core of the earth, and then have them release everything, all thoughts and feelings and everything from their day, everything from the year, everything, thoughts, anxieties about the future, or just thoughts of the future, the idea of the future, the past, whatever, to let it all just sink down through the steel and concrete, through the bedrock, through the mantle, down to the white hot core at the center of the earth, to return that energy to the earth with gratitude and trust that the earth would purify it, and to breathe the sky, to feel the ocean current moving in their veins, to feel the stuff of the earth in their bones, and So, so that was a lot of the inspiration behind kind of the idea of Charles going with the creepy man down to the center of the earth. Now, originally, when the creepy man came up, when I originally wrote it back in 2015 or 14, whenever it was, I didn't have any backstory behind the creepy man. I just thought that if such an interdimensional coffee house was open to all dimensions, not just in a Rick and Morty sense where it's things just like this one or brightly colored things with lots of orifices, in a very comedic way. But, whatever, that there'd be these, what's the word, chthonic, the word for, the ancient sort of gods in the Lovecraftian universe. Chthonic, is that the word? Anyway, so yeah, the creepy man was meant to be something like that. There's some kind of ancient creepy thing that, of course, the coffee house translates everything into human form for the humans. And so he comes across as the creepy man in the gray suit. So it was 2017 that the idea came to make the creepy man a receptacle of all the knowledge of an entire universe in its twilight period, in toward the end of its life. And then the idea came to make that planet or the beings in that universe the impetus for Charles the Great to create the coffee house. Now, I think that was not really emphasized at all anywhere in the mouse books or the Multiverse Cartographer, but that was there as an idea. I don't think I ran with it. And so there you basically have the picture of me in around June or whenever it was of 2017 that I wrote it, and was teaching yoga and the crystalline structures in the center of the earth, and the feeling of being ready to just give it all up and plunge into the unknown, to walk through a door out of the known universe into the unknown universe. And I didn't know what I was in for. It turns out, obviously, it's a lot more down to earth, because India is an actual place in present time, not an alternate universe. But for me at that time, having spent 39 years in California, it might as well have been an alternate universe. And so that's basically what's going on with Larry the Librarian. And I made it the last chapter of the mouse books to kind of end with a punch. There's the ironic twist of, is he gay? It's like, sure, why not? He figured, he's one of these however many 8 septillion versions of himself, so what's the point of even existing when he'll continue to exist regardless of what he does? Or a form of him will continue to exist regardless of what he does. And so he decides to go off with the creepy man who wants to mate with him and kill him. So it's like, did he want to do that? Was that a secret hidden desire? I mean, he does the least intuitive thing, is kind of where I was in my, the reader's interpretation is as valid as anybody's. And, from a David Lynchy perspective, I shouldn't even be explaining any of this, but I'm not adhering to his philosophy in what I'm doing, obviously, by making this playlist, the Multiverse Cartographer playlist. So yeah, he just decides to do the one thing that gives him a little spark of like, oh, that would be freaking insane if I did that. If I actually took him up on whatever that offer is. I'll do that. The most extreme thing, which for me, the most extreme thing was to sell all my possessions and give them to the poor. No, I did give away a lot of stuff, but no, I instead decided to relocate and whatnot. So, yeah, so it starts off with him meeting this arrogant version of himself. So, there was a bit of that going on too, where it was sort of the high I was on from having gotten in shape. And I talked a little bit about this in the Carl Jung part of the chicken philosophy. I think it was the Carl Jung. Yeah, I'll just point to it and allow editor Edward to figure it out later. In that episode, I talked about the mana persona that I embodied after integrating the anima, maybe a little bit, sort of. It's what Carl Jung said reminded me of that, was sort of this like very, overconfident person I became after getting it together, kind of, that caused my life at that time to crumble and fall into rubble. And so there I was sitting in the rubble and sort of reflecting on this other Charles that had crumbled it. Now, I'm trying to remember. There was a gap. There was at least like almost a year gap between whatever the previous chapter was and the Larry the Librarian chapter. And then I ended that podcast called the Interdimensional Coffee House, or The Coffee House, an Interdimensional Odyssey, I think was the original title, with Larry the Librarian. But the previous one was where he divided himself into bazillions. I think there were 2 episodes exploring the different versions of Charles that occurred after he rolled the dice. So the quarter, the dice, all that stuff. And the Charles with the quarter that was just so excited that he had the quarter. Then, so it was in around June of 2017 that I decided to take that Charles that I'd already created a year before, I've got the quarter, I get to decide when we all turn back into one, and have him fly up and land on the island with this Charles that was having a very serious, somber conversation with this particular Clara. And so the one with all the power meets the one with no power. And of course, all of them have no power, but this is the one that knows he has no power. And he has this resentment against the version of himself with the power, which at that time would have been a reflection of me looking at myself a few months earlier when I thought I had it all figured out. And I mean, speaking from 2023, looking back at this process I went through in 2017, I'm very glad I went through the process, because if I hadn't crumbled that tower, I would still be living in it, and I would not be here in the life that I have now. So he changes his mind. He meets the creepy man. The creepy man turns out to be a black sphere. There's a bit of backstory from the perspective of the creepy man, i.e. the black sphere, i.e. part of the consciousness of the crystalline structure, the sphere that is around the last orangish embers of the fire, the campfire of this dying planet in this cold universe of vast space. And so it's kind of like, at the same time, an answer or a process of finding solace in the knowledge that the current scientific consensus basically is that the most likely outcome to this whole universe thing is that in trillions or quintillions or whatever of years, whatever this dark energy is will have separated everything out so far that you won't even see anything in the night sky, because everything will be so far apart. And if there's any record or idea of there being other galaxies, there'll come a time when people will doubt that and say, well, I don't see them. They say that they're there in the records, but, deep fakes and CGI, I don't know. I think that NASA made it all up, or whatever the equivalent in that future, hypothetical future will be. People will doubt that there are other galaxies, and then eventually doubt that there are other stars, and then eventually doubt that there's their own star when it becomes a brown dwarf, or when it just isn't there anymore, if there's even anybody to think about these things. So the idea is that this crystalline structure is the descendant of all of us, or the descendant of whatever life, whatever can be called life now. or some new form of life that hasn't even gotten started yet. And they have begun to doubt the existence of the others, even though they contain all of the memories of everyone that they've ever been in contact with in their ancient past. So Charles, this Charles character, merges with that ancient universe being and creates a new being. And then in the original recording, there was some music from Ghost in the Shell, of course. Those who haven't seen it, the protagonist merges with another being. Basically, it's a good thing. It's a good show. The movie, not the Scarlett Johansson, the anime movie, is good. I've seen some of the series shows, and some of them I liked, but the more recent one, it's just too much like that 3D CGI. I couldn't get into it. I tried. It takes place in the desert in Nevada, and I was just like, I couldn't. Their mouths are like, while they're talking, like I'm talking now, and it's just, I can't. It's not close enough to the that valley. You know what I mean. Anyway, now the previous episode, you might have, if you watched it to the end, noticed it was dedicated to my friend. It said for Salim. That's Stephen Salim Wright. He was a good friend of mine. I mean, I gave him his orientation to join the Golden Dawn. What's the Golden Dawn? Here's the Esoteric podcast. That's too much information about all that. But anyway, sadly, I never interviewed him for an episode. But yeah, he's a very, very intelligent guy. Neuroatypical, I think, is the... I don't know enough to be able to say specifically where he was coming from, but extremely intelligent and struggled emotionally. And his family made it clear after I put out Larry the Librarian and dedicated it to him. If you thought it was implied that he had ended his own life, his family clarified he did not, but they don't know exactly what happened. But anyway, he was someone who I knew for certain was watching this series. So he watched 1 through 15, and then his life ended. So now I don't even know if anybody's watching this. But so yeah, I miss him. He's a good guy. So what else? It makes reference to, thanks to Clara's manipulations, a young Charles Rubin was left unsupervised long enough. So the idea is she's omniscient, and I mean, she's making sure that dots connect that are meant to connect, because she would not exist if all of these things didn't happen. If, she made sure that Charles went back and gave the right advice at the right time to Blythe and Charles the Grey for them to rescue Simon in just a particular time and place and way in order for her to exist. She, showed the creepy man, or rather that ancient planet, Charles's face when he was a young boy. In chapter 1 of the Multiverse Cartographer. And in order for it to become obsessed with him, so that later he would merge, this version of Charles would merge with that ancient consciousness and become Larry the Librarian, who was someone she already knew. So she knew that Larry the Librarian existed and knew how he came to be, and she made sure it happened. So she's quite an interesting character to think about. She's one and she's many. She goes back and forth when she sleeps. When she sleeps, she becomes one, and when she wakes up, she's many. But all of them, though they have their human issues that have been talked about, and they have certain very human traits, they are a replica of Blythe at a particular time in her life, but they have 16,000 years times all of them. For those who've seen the recent episode of Invincible, it's sort of like duplicate, making reference to if you add up all the years of all the versions of me that I've lived, it's at least 2,000 years, even though I'm only 20, that kind of thing. So Clara has 16,000 years of life for each Clara. So if you multiply that times 8 sextillion, then you have the number of years of experience that she has. And we saw her in her very first moments when she realized where she was, who she was, and what she was, and saw the other Claras on the other islands. And then we see her 16,000 years later, where she's completely at ease with being the barista of the coffee house, and that's just what she is. That's her role. She has her room inside of it, and then there's the library, where clearly that's where Larry the Librarian lives. So there's a lot left for you to think about that I don't just come out and say. Like, what is it like to be Larry the Librarian? Who is this guy? The guy at the end that looks like Charles but older and has white hair, and the memories of Charles and the memories of an entire universe. And how is it that he's a librarian in this vast library that includes apparently every copy of the Multiverse Cartographer, of which there's, again, 8 sextillion. So, there's some TARDIS physics happening. Though obviously Doctor Who was a big, one of the main inspirations behind the coffee house itself, this version of it anyway, that came about when I decided to take the idea of the astral coffee house and make it the interdimensional coffee house. Anyway, so yeah, like I said, I decided to, rather than script something and read it to you, I decided to just kind of off the cuff talk about Larry the Librarian. And moving forward, I will read and talk about the rest of there's only a few more chapters left of the Multiverse Cartographer, including the mouse books. So in other words, the New World Empire, the Interdimensional Coffee House. So I will read those in upcoming episodes. And Larry being his name, for one, it's sort of just a comedically normal name. Normal in the past, it's less normal now. It's sort of a Gary Larson, Far-Side-ish kind of name. It strikes me that way. But also, it's a callback to Larry the Biker. And there's an interesting kind of dynamic there where there's a lingering guilt for what I did to Larry the Biker. Even though he struck first, I struck back harder than he struck me. And then I was left to stew on that and feel guilty about that. And I make reference to that a little bit in the Arbitel series, talking about doing black magic before I took my oath when I was 16. The oath was when I was 16, the black magic, I was 15. And so yeah, if you don't know what I'm talking about, then check out Larry the Biker, which you can find in the New World Empire and the Interdimensional Coffee House, along with a lot of other things. So this includes everything that I've read to you on this program and everything that I'm going to read you on this program, plus a lot of other things that aren't related to either the New World Empire or the Interdimensional Coffee House. I'll just read a little bit of an example. The gooey bubble of graven images. When I was 12, my dad and I walked from 81 Vista Circle up the canyon to the dam. I told him I thought I was getting a little closer to discovering what, I guess for lack of a better term, would be my religion. So there's stories like this, like Larry the Biker and like The Last and like Thoth, or the Thoth Parade, which are just straight tellings, as far as I can remember, of events that actually happened. And then there's other stories that are silly and other stories that are made up and more thoughtful and a lot of different kinds of things. And then mixed in there is also the New World Empire and the Interdimensional Coffee House stories. So again, link in the description for that. And so making Larry the biker into Larry the librarian. I mean, it's interesting to me how one can have the urge to want to glorify the oppressed, especially when they're the ones who oppressed them. And this can be reminiscent in things like a person who's descended from those who wronged the native people of what we now call America. So, just to be clear, we're talking about, like, for example, the Aztecs, or, if someone's of a Spanish background and they think the Aztecs are the best, or if someone's from a British descended background and they think that, who were the ones that were the Apaches, or whatever, the native people in general, just kind of lumping them all into one as if it wasn't multiple nations and multiple cultures, and saying that they are the wise ones, they are the ancient ones with the true wisdom that nobody else has ever been able to fathom. There's a similar thing there, because I mean, what happened was a British person maybe was deciding they were going to travel west, and then some Apaches came and attacked them. So they attacked them back, but they had better weapons. They had guns and stuff, and they killed all the Apaches and then settled in the west and said, "Ha, mine." Then they had kids, the kids had kids, the kids had kids, the kids had kids, and the kids had kids, and those kids are the ones who think that, who listen to Dead Can Dance and get teary-eyed thinking about the Native Americans that were wronged by their own ancestors and think that they're the ones with the wisdom. I'm just drawing a parallel. I'm not mocking that or anything. That's a thing that happens, and that's the best example I could think of and the closest to home. And I can see that pattern in retrospect, looking at how there's a chapter called Larry the Biker in Smaller Mouse, which is in here. And at the end of the Small Gray Mouse, there's a chapter called Larry the Librarian. And they're both Larry, and it's no coincidence. So those are my thoughts on Larry the Librarian. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Multiverse Cartographer podcast and the Multiverse Cartographer YouTube channel. And I'm gonna start doing this again until I'm finished. Maybe I'll just do one chapter at a time instead of trying to cram 2 and 3 into each episode, and I'll just off the cuff talk like I am now. And that's all out of me. And again, feel free to check out Chicken Philosophy, which I'll put there, and I will bid you a wonderful, wonderful day and a wonderful week. Until next time.